Dr. Liam Fox.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Electricity transmission is something upon which we all depend, and simultaneously something which we all tend to take for granted. The upgrading of the network is necessary to ensure that we can improve the efficiency and resilience of our system. It will enable us to improve our energy security by bringing in new capacity, such as in the nuclear field, and improve our renewable capacity by increasing the use of such elements as offshore wind. On this much, we will all be able to agree. At the same time, farmers and homeowners, local communities and individuals should expect to have their rights and interests protected while this programme unfolds, and to be treated fairly and equitably where disputes arise. It is the failure of these elements which necessitate this bill being brought forward today. In the UK, National Grid plc owns and operates our electricity and natural gas transmission networks. It is one of the largest investor-owned utility companies in the world. In the United States, as well as operating transmission networks, the company produces and supplies electricity and gas, providing both to customers in New York and Massachusetts. Let me be clear to the shareholders of National Grid that it is the intransigence, abrasiveness and downright disrespect of elements of the company's management that has led me to introduce this bill, not only on behalf of my own constituents who are currently affected, but those of many other constituency representatives in this House whose constituents will be affected in the future. Where disputes arise between one of the world's most powerful companies and our constituents, it is essential that we have the means of resolving these disputes in a way that is clear, affordable, fair and enforceable. I believe that the Government shares these objectives and that therefore this bill, as with the Down Syndrome Bill which I brought forward last year, is kept deliberately simple at this second reading stage to enable us to reach agreement on the specific mechanisms that can be incorporated at later stages as the bill progresses through Parliament. One second. It is true that a range of dispute resolution mechanisms exist at the present time, but it's clear from experience that they are not capable of dealing with disputes arising in an acceptable way. If they were, there would be no need for this bill coming forward. I give way to my old friend.
Thank you. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on his impassioned speech? Does he agree with me that we should, in this place, always encourage people to do the right thing, and hopefully this bill will do that? And I was a bit concerned with his introduction where this particular company, it sounds like, is not doing the right thing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not questioning whether the company itself wishes to do the right thing, but in practice they have not behaved in a way that is acceptable to me as a representative of the people of North Somerset. And I would suggest, therefore, that we need new mechanisms to ensure that what I regard as genuinely fair practice is enforceable. That is one of the problems with the current system, which I shall now go on to illustrate. So can I set out the generic case with some specific examples from the experiences of my constituents in North Somerset? The background to all of this, for those who are not familiar, is that in preparation for the Hinkley C nuclear power station coming online, the Hinkley Connection project is a new higher voltage electricity connection between Bridgewater and Seabank near Avonmouth. The new connection will be 57 kilometres long, consisting of 48.5 kilometres of overhead lines and 8.5 of underground cable, mainly through the Mendip Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. The existing 132 kilovolt power lines will be replaced, as they will be across the country, by new 400 kilovolt overhead lines using very much larger T-pylons, with the removal of most of the existing pylon system which we are used to seeing in our towns and countrysides. Now, it's not my intention in this bill to argue the pros and cons of the new pylon system controversial though that is, or to argue for the relative merits of pylons or undergrounding of the new cables, but to ensure that where the interests of our constituents are materially affected, that they are given due protection. A number of my constituents in North Somerset have been battling with National Grid for over 10 years now to try and protect their homes and livelihood. My first constituent's circumstance has resulted in the value of their property being materially impacted by the project, a consequence, perhaps an unavoidable consequence, of this sort of infrastructure upgrade. My second constituent is a farmer whose livelihood is being destroyed by the same scheme. And in both cases, National Grid seem to believe that it has no responsibility to take due regard of the emotional, social or economic consequences facing my constituents, and whose only redress, therefore, is through the courts at the upper tribunal, which, in the case of my first constituent, who was forced to pursue this route, ended up costing them a staggering £200,000 in legal costs. In this first case, the situation was that the family bought their home in January 2008 with the intention of knocking down the old house and building a new one. In doing so, they carried out all possible searches from a conveyancing perspective, as this was their magnum opus and was going to take their life savings and to ultimately provide their pension in years to come. The Hinckley scheme never showed up on any searches undertaken, and by National Grid's admission, they accepted that the Hinckley Connection project would not have been visible by any searches undertaken at this point in time. Once the project was formally announced in 2010, my constituent made representations at every possible hearing to both National Grid and the Inspectorate, asking factual questions around pylon location and impact. For years, no one was able or willing to provide any specific answers or assurances on whether and to what degree this project would have a material impact on the value of their house, which, as members of the House can imagine, caused and is still causing an unimaginable amount of stress for the family. The feeling of being effectively powerless in a standoff with one of the world's most powerful multinationals has left them with a level of fear and anxiety which I leave the House to imagine. Now, the detail of the scheme was to put two 132 kilovolt lines under their drive and to which includes their garage come office, and a 400 kilowatt T-pylon close enough to the property where, if it were to fall, it would fall right to the edge of their house itself. Now, this is in addition to building an access road that now abuts their property. Where once there were only fields and sheep, there will now be a massive new pylon outside their home. Additionally, they have been served with restrictions around permitted development rights of their property, alongside National Grid and supplying parties being granted access rights to their property. This would allow them to break down their gate or knock down their garage and office in order to carry out any necessary reparations to the undergrounded line. Now, necessary rights perhaps, but with a detrimental effect on the sale price of their property. Now, although my constituents were constantly engaged with National Grid, all conversations were completely ineffectual, as National Grid didn't have to listen or provide any answers to their questions, as they were able constantly to point to the Development Consent Order, the DCO, that seemingly gave them carte blanche to do what they wanted. Now, unlike other large infrastructure schemes, such as HS2 or Crossrail, there was no discretionary compensation scheme established for this project, so National Grid have simply focused on what they have been legally allowed to do, with little regard for the impact on individuals' existing properties, irrespective of the personal or financial impact, something members may want to think about in respect to future potential cases. Consequently, the only route left open for my constituent was to pursue a blight claim through the upper tribunal in order to protect their home and life savings, which they absolutely did not want to do, for reasons that are readily apparent. Given the rarity of statutory blight claims, they recognised the enormous risk in undertaking such an action, and they did not take it lightly. However, since they had no other avenues to pursue, they were compelled to do something in order to avoid financial ruin. So, to be clear, all they were trying to protect was their right to be able to sell their house at a fair market value at a time of their choosing, something that I would like to think would be regarded as a basic right on both sides of this House. The odds are stacked against individuals in such cases. Even the small win that my constituent made in the judgment, namely that they recognised that there would be a 5% diminution in the value of their property, was pointless, as National Grid will no longer accept and pay compensation, as they say that the rights that they now require over the property have changed. A constant moving of the goalposts, as well as a refusal to accept responsibility for their actions or decisions which go against them, has been a constant feature in the behaviour of National Grid. Their response is all too typically to challenge individuals to take them to the upper tribunal, with a potentially huge new tranche of expense. I give way.
I'm very grateful for my right honourable friend giving way. As the country moves to decarbonise and to move away from fossil fuels, a conservative estimate is that the requirement for electricity is going to double and possibly triple in the next 20 or 30 years. And an inevitable consequence of that is that we're going to need many more pylon routes. So does he agree with me that this is a particularly opportune bill and is very important for members who perhaps think it doesn't apply to them yet?
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for making that point so clearly. It is a relatively small geographical problem at the moment. It affects a relatively small number of us. It is going to be a much bigger problem in the future, affecting many more constituencies across the country. As so often happens, we are able today to anticipate a problem and do something about it. What I hope will not happen, which all too often happens, is that we try to kick it into the long grass. It is far better that we find a solution to this problem now that is fair and reasonable, enforceable and equitable, and we bring that forward by government action, than we face long fights on behalf of our constituents in this House and potentially through the legal system. The current system, Madam Deputy Speaker, of forcing constituents to the upper tribunal is neither fair nor affordable, and access to justice is not possible where one side is able to use its financial and therefore legal might to effectively intimidate those who stand in their way. Exactly the point that my honourable friend was making. Now, my second constituent is a local North Somerset farmer who has some of his land adjacent to my first constituent. His family have been farming in this area for generations. As with so many of our farmers, they love and care for this land and the local environment, and they focus on farming in an environmentally friendly and regenerative manner, where the preservation of soil is key to the whole business model. As a consequence of this scheme and the flagrant disregard for this preservation, his land has been ruined for generations to come. Haul roads have been constructed over peat bogs that cause material drainage issues, and National Grid have consistently refused to agree a workable drainage strategy. This will impact future yields and render it less productive and less valuable as farmable land, not just for a couple of years, but for generations. And what's worse, a compensation scheme agreed with National Grid's land agent at the start of the scheme has now been reneged upon, as National Grid are now questioning the formula agreed by their own land agent. When my constituent challenged this approach, he was faced with a bullying and abrasive response, and is constantly told that he can pursue the matter through the courts, which quite obviously he's not in a position to do. Additionally, as a consequence of the company's inadequate, seemingly ignorant and ill-thought-out approach towards the resettling of badgers, sets have been blocked off, which forced badgers onto his land and infected his herd, something which he told them could happen, but they chose not to listen to. As someone who had never had a single case of TB on his farm for 30 years, he was forced to cull 110 cattle out of a herd of 350. 70 of these were in calf, so not only did he lose a huge proportion of his stock, but it has massively affected his stock for the next 3 years, which in turn has cost him tens of thousands of pounds. And that is without taking on board the suffering that farmers endure when they witness the suffering and slaughter of their own animals. A third case involves another farmer whose land had whose land an access road was driven. Promises were made to return the land to its previous condition, which was incidentally part of the best quality farming land in the area. When I visited the farm recently, I was horrified at the condition of the fields, where building debris was so widely scattered that it would be impossible to utilise a range of farming vehicles without undue damage. Yet again, the response from National Grid, or at least its local agents, was that they had done what was required of them, and that if my constituent was not satisfied, then they would see them in court. A very regular chorus being developed in this particular song. A fourth case involved an elderly constituent who has a single piece of land, which is her chief financial asset. This has effectively been taken out of use for the next 7 years by National Grid, perfectly legally, as part of their access programme for the installation of the new pylons and underground cables. Again, there's been a callous disregard for the fact that this effectively renders her biggest source of potential income inaccessible. And here again, the response has been, if that she is not happy, she can pursue the matter through the courts. This disregard for individual interests and natural justice appalls me. Members across this House will be able to see from these relatively simple examples a clear pattern of behaviour being developed. Some might say that from the point of view of National Grid's shareholders, their approach is not an irrational one, as they will be able to proceed with their electricity transmission project at minimal discretionary financial cost. The rest of us, however, will surely believe that we have to put in place measures to fulfil the 4 tests that I set out earlier, giving our constituents a system of dispute resolution that is clear, that is affordable, that is fair, and is enforceable. Now, I'm grateful to ministers for the discussions that we have had thus far on the subject, and their understanding that there is a clear problem that needs to be addressed. The current range of dispute resolution mechanisms are not adequate, and that cannot be allowed to stand as the solution to the problem. There are a range of options which I hope we can continue to explore as we move towards the committee stage and subsequent stages of this bill. I've noticed in recent weeks a growing awareness from members representing constituencies across the country who recognise that this will become a problem for them if we do not find adequate solutions now. As I said at the beginning, Madam Deputy Speaker, we all understand the need for an effective, efficient and resilient electricity transmission system. But it cannot be built at the expense of our constituents and the concept of natural justice to which they are undoubtedly entitled. We cannot allow large multinationals to bully those who have legitimate interests and grievances, using their financial and therefore their legal might to crush resistance underfoot. Today, it is largely my constituents in North Somerset who are most affected, but many more constituencies will be affected in the future. We in this House have a duty to protect in any situation those who are weak from the excesses of those who are stronger, and ensure that decency, social responsibility and rights of property owners and environmental protection are given their proper place. Last year, in passing the Down Syndrome Bill, this House showed that it understood that it could unite to provide for the common good. I ask colleagues to do the same today.
The question is, the bill be now read a second time.